series of bash scripts, which turned into more sophisticated tools. Some purchased more written in-house, mostly in Python, and mostly by the engineering staff. We didn't have a DevOps group when we started. We have 2 guys now, and they blur the lines between what they're doing manually and what they're trying to automate themselves. Just like any startup environments, everybody was just kind of building their own machines, has that hacker mentality. We're automating like our build process, we're automating our branching process, we're automating our our release process, and people are just bringing that philosophy. And I think we blur the lines a lot between DevOps and engineering. And I think a lot of you probably do the same thing at your companies. I'm really excited to have these guys tonight. I don't want to take up very much time at all. I realize the lightning talks are short. There's a bunch of people here from FlipKey tonight. If you guys just raise your hands. If you guys have any questions, please just, don't mean to call these guys out. They didn't know I was going to do that. But if you have any questions, just let us know. And on that, I'm just going to turn it over to the first speaker tonight, who I think is Ryan. Thanks again for coming. All right, is this good? Can people hear me? It's good? Yep. All right, perfect. All right, so everybody's got the information here. I can move on. All right. So, my name's Ryan McCall. I'm a software engineer here at FlipKey. And the title of my talk is Lessons from the Configuration Management Trenches. So I'm trying to stay on message here. We're supposed to be a little bit more focused on the process and the people, but I'm going to really try to tie it to my experience of building out our configuration management stuff for our development environment over the past couple of months. But before I get started, I wanted to put up this XKCD from this week. I think it's kind of relevant. If you didn't see it, basically we have an engineer saying, my new keyboard goes 30% faster. Sure, that focus on efficiency is kind of crazy. But that's a lot. 30% is a lot of time. And then he says, but dude, I just watched you open and close Google Chrome 5 times in a row. That's why the efficiency is that important, right? So the moral of this story is engineers love efficiency. Whether it's real or imagined, engineers love efficiency. You put a problem in front of an engineer and they'll solve it to go 10% faster. That's the engineering mentality. But business people, I think they're more focused on actual efficiency. And DevOps is a really unique space where you can combine the business focus and the engineering focus and achieve that efficiency. You can deliver that real efficiency that the engineer is attracted to and the business person requires. So, what's the promise? The promise of DevOps is happy devs, happy ops. Well, happier ops. Your ops guys they're probably not going to come in and be the most cheerful people on your team, but you can make them a little bit happier. And I think one of the reasons you'll make them happier is you don't hear them saying, oh, it works on my local. Like, the less we can say it works on my local and the more we can say it works everywhere, the happier your ops guys are going to be. So when I think about what DevOps is, I think I can sum up the goal of DevOps in one phrase. I think it's eliminating friction. Friction is anything that keeps you from getting the things done that's on your to-do list. And maybe it's your build process takes 30 or 45 minutes. Maybe it's your deploy process, requires somebody on the ops team to do it, and if that guy's out today, well, you can't ship your code. Friction is what undermines your success, and DevOps is all about eliminating friction. That's the goal. If you had to boil it down, DevOps is eliminating friction. But when do you decide to go and start doing DevOps? I think it's when you realize there's a lot of friction. You've got a lot of friction in your processes. Maybe you have a lot of overhead in your communication, and your management and your team members realize, hey, we need to invest in it, and we think we can. We have the bandwidth to do the investment to figure out how we can reduce this friction. So where are we at on the journey? So this is kind of lift up the kimono and tell you where we're at. Like Jeff was saying, we kind of grew up organically. We started with a bunch of manual processes. We had a lot of talented engineers who could make that work for a long time. Today, we're much more process driven. We care about speed. That's our number one mantra, as in the TA in TripAdvisor, is that speed wins. So we've gotten a lot better at stuff. We're good at identifying issues. We're good at code review. We're good at QA. We have daily releases. We have good monitoring for our production environment. But we still have some areas where we need to do some work. Like I said, I spent the last 2 months, and Jeff kind of alluded to this, refactoring our configuration management for our dev environments. Our production environment, is a little bit different than what our developers use to develop the code, and all those are gaps that need to be addressed. And I think that it's really exciting. DevOps gives you a chance, like once you identify one area and reduce the friction in one area, you can go off and tackle the next area and the next area until you have a streamlined process. So let me just give you 4 takeaways that I learned doing the last 2 months of configuration management. Really trying to give you some specific examples and then tie it to a bigger idea. So the first thing I'd say, first lesson, is steer into the skid. So what I mean by that is, if something's painful, do it more often. If you're releasing once a month, your release process can be really slow and really painful, and you're not doing it enough that you're actually going to go and decide to change it. But if you do it every day, you're going to get that bad boy streamlined so that it only takes you 15 minutes or 30 minutes. So whatever you're doing that's painful, do it more often. It'll make you better. It helps you sand down the rough edges. It reduces the friction. Next, hold your tools the way they want to be held. If you find yourself working really hard to do something that your tool doesn't want you to do, then you're probably doing it wrong. The important thing here is to hold your tools the way they want to be held. Sometimes means you have to break your existing process. You have to go and change your code to follow the whatever paradigm you decided on with your tools. Sometimes you have to break your code to fit into the model so that you can hold your tools the way they want to be held. And you need the latitude to do that. So, stuff's going to go wrong, right? I think everybody has this shared experience. You go to some conference or you read some article and you're like, hey, this seems like a great idea. Simple. We'll just do X or Y and our code's going to be 10% faster, or we're going to have 10% less bugs. And then you come into work and you start implementing, and you're like, man, there's a lot of pitfalls. And there's going to definitely be pitfalls wherever you're at in your DevOps process. Whether it's like we're changing the process a little bit and we have to get everybody on board, or we're changing our code, how we do our deploys, or we're changing whatever aspect, there's going to be some broken eggs along the way. You're going to have unexpected things. There's going to be a lot of implicit stuff that you just took for granted when you were doing it, and you had a human being in the role that your DevOps tool is going to take. I mean, humans are great at dealing with ambiguity. DevOps tools suck at dealing with ambiguity, but it's worth it. It's worth it if you can get there. The last lesson I learned is that one does not simply do DevOps 90% of the way. DevOps is really one of those things that's kind of an all or nothing. 90% is a lot closer to 0% than it is to 100% for DevOps. If you have a process that works 9 out of 10 times, it's no good to you in a production environment. You need something that is bulletproof and reliable. And really what that means is you need to be committed to making it bulletproof, making it reliable. Anything less than 100% is just going to ultimately be a waste of your time. You don't have to get here on day one, but you need to get here eventually. Lastly, and probably most importantly, when you're thinking about how you're going to sell this to your managers, is how long will it take? And I got a little bit of bad news here. At least that's been my takeaway. I see Jeff smiling a little bit. So this is kind of what you think. Whatever 4 is, 4 man hours, 4 man days, 4 man months, whatever. That's what you think. That's what your boss thinks. Like, let's double it. There's a lot of stuff that, this ambitious person that wants to change the way things are working is going to encounter. That's kind of what it really takes. It's going to take a little bit of time. It's not an overnight thing. But it's something that you can tackle and make progress on. As you pick off one thing, the next thing gets a little bit easier. So I just wanted to wrap up by reiterating the 4 lessons I learned. First, you want to steer into the skid. If it's painful, do it more often. Use the tools the way they want to be used. When things go wrong, don't be surprised. that it takes a little bit longer than you expected, but in the end, I think once you have that first milestone that you get past, you're going to realize, hey, this was worth the investment, and everybody else is going to too. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
I'm just going to talk.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, make sure you guys introduce yourselves.
Hey, can you hear me? If not, I can speak without the mic and then you will. So, my name is Mick England. I'm 5 weeks into my position at Cengage, which itself is a DevOps anti-pattern. My title is the DevOps manager, and I'll get into that later. So, Cengage is at a pretty early stage in the adoption of DevOps. Not for the want of trying. I'm told that over the last 12 months, there's been valiant efforts to adopt a DevOps culture, a DevOps approach, and really now we're at a stage where there's serious executive buy-in and the desire to hire me as a DevOps manager to basically lead that effort. With another DevOps anti-type forming a DevOps team, which I'll get into. Not only I would have had a problem with this, but at Cengage I think it works for a number of reasons, which I will explain. First of all, Cengage is a fair-sized company. We have around 6,000 employees with 1,200 engineers split across half a dozen locations. We have 2 operations teams plus an offshore NOC. There's around 60 products that the engineers are working on. Cengage is also an old company by tech standards, with old habits across both operations and engineering teams, and to some degree with old people who are reluctant to change. We're also going through somewhat of a rebirth and a technical reset, as like many in the publishing industry, we strive to emerge as a leader in digital education resources rather than simply a publisher of texts. And it's this technical resource, to address the first question that was posed to us, what's the motivation, how do you get started? It's this technical reset that is driving the DevOps program at Cengage. And from that standpoint, we're in a very good position because we have very strong executive buy-in, even if they don't quite understand what they're buying into. Having a specific DevOps team has actually allowed us to focus on recruiting ops guys who get DevOps. It's become somewhat obligatory to include the term DevOps engineer in the job description, if not in the actual title, in order to differentiate from the perception of old school sysadmins who act as the gatekeepers of production, waiting for code to be thrown over the wall to be deployed into their kingdom. We certainly don't want to give that impression in the new operations teams that we're building out at Cengage. A good candidate for working in a DevOps culture is not someone who knows Puppet or Chef or other tools. Chances are the right candidate will have a good tool set, but that's certainly not my main criteria for hiring. A good sysadmin, and I'm talking about, just to explain, I come from the ops side of DevOps. I've got 30 years as a sysadmin, and a lot of the principles that are bound up with the DevOps movement I consider to be best practices that I've been doing long before the DevOps term was even coined. So I say a good sysadmin will have actually been using the main practices contained within the DevOps model without necessarily applying a name to it. Those practices include breaking down walls between operations and engineering, automating processes, advocating continuous integration and frequent releases. These are all things that make a sysadmin's life a little less painful. And the best sysadmins have been advocating this for years. However, the term of a DevOps team and the title of a DevOps manager in a company like Cengage has a big impact. It's one thing to go into a startup and advocate DevOps. It's relatively simple. You know, you've got developers doing operational tasks, you're bringing in new ops folks. The problem with most startups is they think way too late about making their services operationally functional, and then they have to bring in ops guys to try and make this do, because they realize that there is a place for specific systems operations expertise. When I turn up at meetings as the DevOps manager at Cengage, it immediately focuses the discussion on, okay, what is DevOps? Who's this new guy who's coming in and telling us how we should be doing stuff? What is DevOps? What does this mean for me? What does it mean for my team, etc.? What's the new way of doing things? And it gives me an opportunity to address the relationship between engineering as a whole, including QA, which is integral to this, and those with specific operational skill sets who I manage in my team. And one of the biggest questions that comes up is, how do we move from simply building software from a developer standpoint to building systems? And what makes systems operational? And I explain that my conception is that the DevOps team is itself a temporary subset of the cloud system team itself. So the other impetus for the DevOps program is that, in line with the transition to the digital era, you know, the moving away from Cengage being regarded as a book publishing, a textbook publishing company, to being a provider of a digital platform, which it actually already is, but we need to increase that conception and become the leader in this market. The move towards that is also accompanied by a move from massive data center build-outs into the cloud. It's also accompanied with a move from huge homogeneous applications that were deployed and repeatedly told by my boss, the executive director of cloud services, that when he got here, they were doing yearly deployments on the academic schedule. You know, how do you get from that to a service-oriented architecture? Rapid deployment. How do you keep ahead of the competition? There's at least 3 people in this space. So anyway, so these are the issues I explained. So moving on quickly, just in some of the current state of adoption. We could take the checklist approach to this. Yeah. The question was, where are we at in the adoption of DevOps? How are we doing CI? Check. Configuration management, etc. Check. I don't think this is a correct approach, and I don't think it gets us very far. I think a better question would be to ask, how close are we to solving the problems we're seeking to solve by adopting DevOps? For me, DevOps is not about everyone getting along and Dev and Ops hanging out over a beer together, although that can help, and it's often useful. The real question is, how do you get to the goals that you're trying to solve? What are the problems you're trying to solve with DevOps? And I've seen various approaches to implement the DevOps, ranging from management subcommittees, which endlessly discuss over a 3 to 6 month period, what is DevOps, how do we do it, to guerrilla movements by devs, or more commonly ops people, implementing this from below and forcing it up the chain. But the real thing is, what are we trying to achieve? And what we're trying to achieve is scalable systems that are operational. And how do we do that as a team? And that involves getting together, as I said, devs, QA, ops, and even project managers from the very beginning to say, how is this piece of code that we're developing that provides a functionality to a customer, how is this going to be operational at scale? That's, to me, what DevOps is.
You can keep the mic, I can talk really loud. But you might be deaf afterwards. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, well, you could have taken my time. I think you did take some of my time. So if you don't already know, Mick and I both work together. We both work at Cengage. I'm Sean Sheeran. I'm the enterprise architect associated with Cengage. My responsibility at Cengage started with the cloud movement, but it's quickly moved into working directly with Mick and Barton somewhere out there, operations as well for Cengage. How many people here are operations based? How many people here are The other side of the coin, architects or engineers. All right. How many people here are DevOps? You probably should. You're DevOps manager. So how many people here are just sysadmins? Right? Yeah, I'm going to put my hand up for that. Because one thing that I've worked on at Cengage is actually helping build out some of our tooling to help our cloud movement. I was building out some of our automation for basically building cloud-based systems. But as my project needed, hey, I want something to send my logs to, started building out Logstash for my project and things of that nature. But one thing that I've come to realize is as I build these systems, you become attached to these systems. So any engineer here probably understands the fact that we get postpartum, right? A good example, a couple of weeks ago, we have Logstash that we deployed out into the wild. We're sending about 2 million logs every 5 minutes, give or take, to our Logstash system. It was having some issues. Who got involved? Myself. Another one of our architects that actually built a good chunk of it got involved, right? Because we're the parents of this particular system. We came up with the inception of it, we built it, we spent a lot of time on it, and part of what I'm working on, or at least trying to understand better as I move into this DevOps and operations world, is the fact that you actually have to take these technologies and know that they're going into good hands. Because, right, they're part of you. You've spent a lot of time. Sometimes, depending on how long the build took, it could have, that's months that you've spent building this system, getting it into dev, then moving it through the QA process. And when you don't have a DevOps program, somebody that's there from the beginning, you're the one doing this, right? You're spending a lot of time with this system. So one of the things that we're working on